So indeed, I'm happy to share with you the topic of quality of life in pediatric and congenital cardiology. This is really where my heart belongs. It's late afternoon right now, and maybe some of you are in need for an afternoon nap, and therefore let me start with the conclusions of my talk. First, overall quality of life in adults with congenital heart disease is good. Persons with congenital heart disease can have a better quality of life than healthy peers if it is measured in terms of satisfaction with life. International variation in quality of life and patient-reported health is confirmed. And patient characteristics are more explanatory than country differences. Please allow me some minutes to describe how I come to these conclusions. Well, we have to go back to the 70s. At that time, it was for the very first time that someone was talking about quality of life in congenital heart disease. It was Dr. Charlotte Ference. She wrote this paper, The Quality of Life of the Adolescent Cardiac Patient. Since then, a lot has happened. And it was in 2015 that Evalina Bratt and myself conducted a literature review. We looked at the studies on quality of life that has been published over the past 40 years. And this is what we found. Since then, a lot of publications have been published. There was really an exponential growth in the number of publications. And overall, at the end of 2014, we identified 234 publications on quality of life in congenital heart disease. Where did these publications come from? This is the map of the world. The countries indicated in pink are countries where quality of life research have been done. Overall, 35 countries where quality of life research has been conducted. But of course, the distribution is different. Not all countries have a lot of quality of life research. This is actually the distribution. Half of all the publications on quality of life in congenital heart disease are stemming from the United States, the Netherlands, and Germany, followed by the UK, Belgium, and Japan. Where is France? Here you are. At that time, at the end of 2014, there were 6 publications on quality of life in congenital heart disease coming from France. I'm sure today it's different, looking at the work that Pascal has been doing over the past years. But of course, it's not all about the quantity, the number of articles. It's also about the quality. And in the same literature review on the 40 years of quality of life research, we looked at certain criteria for the quality of life research. There were 10 criteria that have been developed before in the 90s, and we were applying these 10 criteria on quality of life research. And you can see that the score from 0 to 100, 0 means not a single criterion has been fulfilled, 100 means all the criteria has been fulfilled. You see that something is happening here. And you see that indeed the quality of the papers in general, the quality of the quality of life studies in general is improving. And this is shown by the red line, where you see that the average score over time is indeed increasing. However, the median score is dropping back to 0. This means that although more and more articles are published with a high quality score, the majority, means more than 50%, still has a quality score of 0. This means that yes, we are doing better, but we are not there yet. And therefore also in the interpretation of quality of life research, you always have to be aware of, is this indeed a study with a high quality? Another interesting thing that happened over the past years is that 2 literature reviews and meta-analysis have been published over the past years. In 2015, this meta-analysis came out entitled "Quality of Life in Adolescents and Young Adults with Congenital Heart Disease is Not Reduced." This is a review coming from Denmark, and the main conclusion of these authors was: we have shown that quality of life in adolescents and young adults with congenital heart disease is not reduced when compared with age-matched controls. In the same year, 2015, another review was published, coming from UK, a British and German collaboration. The main conclusion of that review was: the results of this study suggest that quality of life is impaired in moderate or complex congenital heart disease, while no such an impact of congenital heart disease on quality of life could be established on average in patients with simple defects. What is it now? How can we interpret this? One said there is no reduction, the other said yes, there is a reduction. Then we need to look closer in what happened here and what are the articles that are included here. The study coming from CAR included only studies that measured quality of life using the SF-36. And SF-36 is a very generic instrument, it's widely used, but it looks at quality of life from a rather functional point of view. Can you walk 3 blocks? Can you climb a flight of stairs? How is functioning at work? How is your social functioning? So pretty much from a functional point of view. On the other hand, the study from Denmark, they included studies in which quality of life was measured with a linear analog scale ranging from 0 to 100. So it's only one item. How do you perceive your quality of life on a scale from 0 being the worst imaginable quality of life to 100 being the best imaginable quality of life? And if you use this from a more satisfaction of life point of view, then you see indeed that there is no difference between patients and their healthy peers. Another aspect that is interesting that came out from this review was the finding that the results from some countries, most notably the Netherlands and Switzerland, seem to be better compared with the US or Canada, while the expected random fluctuations in results was found for the remaining countries. Well, this is intriguing because it raises the question, is there a difference in the quality of life of patients depending on the country where they live in? And on one hand, you would assume, based on these findings, yes, there is a difference. However, the big question here is there a real difference in the quality of life between the countries? Or is this due to the fact that we look differently upon this? Are we using different methods? Are we using different instruments? Are we using different patient populations to look at? So if we really would like to address the issue of inter-country variation, we need to make sure that we are all looking through the same glasses. We all need to use a uniform methodology that helps us to understand potential intra-country variations. And this was, in fact, the rationale to set up the Approach-IS study. Approach-IS stands for Assessment of Patterns of Patient-Reported Outcomes in Adults with Congenital Heart Disease, an international study. The goals of Approach-IS were twofold. First, we wanted to investigate what are the differences in patient-reported outcomes of adults with congenital heart disease who are living in different areas of the world? Second, how can these differences be understood? Once again, this is a map of the world, and these were the countries and the centers that participated in Approach-IS. Overall, 24 centers from 15 countries located at 5 continents. And yes, indeed, France participated in this study. It was the group of Lyon that contributed to Approach IS. How did the sample look like? Overall, we have included more than 4,000 patients. Data collection was running from 2013 to 2015. 53% were females, and the mean age of the patients was 32 years. When you look at the distribution of the complexity, you can see that 1/4 of the patients had a mild heart condition, about half had a moderately complex condition, and 1/4 had a complex heart condition. Since Approach IS is about patient-reported outcomes, therefore, of course, we need to have the voice of the patients. Therefore, we were using questionnaires, standardized, validated questionnaires that were available in the different languages, because you can imagine a project like this, we had overall 11 different languages that participated. And the primary outcomes were measured with questionnaires looking at self-reported health, psychosocial functioning, behavioral outcomes, and quality of life. I don't go too far in the different questionnaires here. Quality of life, in line with previous conceptualizations and in line with what the work that Schroeder in Denmark has been doing, we measured it in 2 ways. One, we used this linear analog scale, going from 0 to 100, and we used the satisfaction with life scale, because some definitions indicate that quality of life ought to be defined in terms of satisfaction with life. And of course, we also wanted to explain potential differences in quality of life. So potential explanatory variables were sense of coherence, illness perceptions, demographic variables, and medical variables. The first results have been published last year in the Journal of the American College of Cardiology, and the article was entitled Quality of Life of Adults with Congenital Heart Disease in 15 Countries, evaluating country-specific characteristics. And this is a key figure from this article. Don't worry about the numbers, it's more about the colors that count here. If we were calculating the quality of life in the overall sample, we found a median score of 80. Remember, on a scale from 0 to 100, which means that indeed the quality of life in adults with congenital heart disease worldwide is pretty good. But of course, there was a difference between the countries. Patients coming from Australia showed the highest quality of life, patients coming from Japan, the lowest one. But what is interesting in this figure is that you also see that within the countries there is a huge variation. And if you compare the within country variation with the between country variation, we realize that in fact it's more about the within country variation than the between country variation. This means that individual factors probably play a higher role, a bigger role than country differences. What are individual characteristics? What are risk factors for getting or developing a poor quality of life? Well, risk factors consistently were older age, job seeking, no marriage history, and worse New York Heart Association functional class. These were consistently found to be predictors for poor quality of life. Factors that did not play a role were sex, educational level, and complexity of the heart defect. This latter may be counterintuitive. A lot of people say, well, but the complexity must play a role. Well, indeed, if you measure it univariately, then you will find an impact of complexity. But once that you put functional status into the equation, the effect of the complexity of the heart defect is removed. We could also find this in other patient-reported outcomes in addition to the quality of life. What is another interesting element in doing a study like Approach-IS is that we also could link the patient-reported outcomes and quality of life scores of our patients to country characteristics. For instance, some years ago, I was doing a study in collaboration with colleagues in Denmark, and one of the reviewers on the paper said, well, yeah, the quality of life in your population is very high, but of course, Denmark is a happy country. So that means that your patients also will have a good quality of life. This triggered the question indeed, is it true that the general happiness level in a country also reflects in patients' characteristics? So this is what we wanted to do with Approach-IS as well. So first of all, we looked at the World Happiness Report. And we found the scores, the happiness scores for the different countries participating in Approach-IS, and we linked this to quality of life. Second, another element is, what about culture? And the great thing is that there is a Dutch researcher, Geert Hofstede, who has spent his career on developing and looking for dimensions to characterize the different cultures of a country. And there are 6 main dimensions in this. For instance, the power distance. Is a population, what is the feeling of a population regarding the distance between the people of the country and those who are in power? If you're living in a very democratic country, then you will see that this feeling of power distance is very small. In more authoritarian regimes or countries, or where people don't have the feeling to really impact on the democratic process, this distance will be bigger. Masculinity, femininity, how important is emancipation in a country? And you see huge differences within the country. So we also wanted to see to what extent are these cultural dimensions linked to patients' quality of life. This is the figure that we made on the relationship between quality of life and general happiness. If you make a line through it, you see that the line will almost be horizontal, which means there is no relationship between the national happiness level and our patients' quality of life. And you can see here, France is pretty much in the middle, both in terms of quality of life as in terms of national happiness. Also, for the dimensions of Hofstede, we could not find any relationship with the quality of life of our patients. This means that indeed, cultural dimensions, national happiness, does not play a role on the quality of life of our patients. I just referred to the first paper that came out. In the meantime, 6 other papers from Approach-IS have been published. It would lead us too far to go through all of them today, but I invite you very much to have a look at this and see how this can be informative for you and help you in getting an understanding of patient-reported outcomes in adults with congenital heart disease. So, let me come back to my conclusion of today. Overall quality of life in adults with congenital heart disease is good, as we have shown in international studies. However, and indeed, the persons with congenital heart disease can have a better quality of life than the healthy peers, but there is an important condition here. When you look upon our patients from a functional point of view, yes, they are doing worse. If you look upon our patients from a satisfaction with life point of view, then they are doing equally good, and in some studies even better. International variation in quality of life in patient-reported health is confirmed, as you could see on the slides here, and patient characteristics are more explanatory than the country differences. In the last slide, I would like to show you all the people that have contributed to Approach IS, because you can imagine when you run a study in 24 centers all over the globe, a lot of people have to contribute to this. So I'd like to take the chance here to thank all of them, all the Approach IS partners, and I would like to thank you for the attention. Thank you very much.